Hi everyone, welcome to another online session. Today we are going to focus on a very challenging subject or topic for most teachers. It's challenging because it's one of the aspects of becoming a teacher is learning how to, how to motivate students and how to create a positive atmosphere in the classroom. I am very excited to welcome my friend Rachel Roberts from England. I know that Rachel is really an expert in this area, so I'm sure we'll learn a lot from her today. So welcome, Rachel, one more time.
Thank you, Aziz.
If you want to make a little introduction of your background, and then we can start sharing the presentation.
Okay, so hi everyone. As Aziz said, my name is Rachel Roberts. I'm a teacher trainer, materials writer, and I also trained as a counsellor and psychotherapist some years ago, and more recently as a coach. So I, as well as the writing and training, I also work as a life, career and business coach with teachers and other education professionals. And on my coaching course, there was a strong emphasis on neuroscience, which I found fascinating. So, I'm very interested in that area between psychology, neuroscience and teaching. And really in this session, I'll be bringing all of those things together and looking at how what we understand about growth mindset can help us to help our students. So,
yes, this is as I said at the very beginning. This is a very interesting topic. Not a lot of teachers, master this art of motivating students because, as you said, there are so many interconnected areas. There is psychology, there is neuroscience, there is a lot of things are connected. So that's why motivating students is really very hard to do it in the classroom, right?
Absolutely, yes, because everybody's different.
Yes, people are different, and we are different each time, each second we change.
Absolutely, but I do think that there are definitely some fundamental things that if we understand it a bit better, I think it can help.
Yes, great. So you can start your presentation.
Okay.
Share your screen.
Okay, so just make sure I can see the chat box. Right, okay. So everybody's watching on Facebook, aren't you? So I won't be able to see your comments anyway, but that's fine. Not a problem. So just so that I can understand the audience better.
I can send you the comments.
Well, what I will do is while they're doing this, I will open up Facebook and then I'll be able to see, won't I?
Okay.
Yeah, because you're in the Everyone Academy, aren't you? So
yes.
Yeah, so I've got a question for you while I work out the technicalities of that process. So how much do you already know about growth mindset? So just put a number. Okay, so 1 is low. So 1 is like almost nothing and 10 is high. I know lots and lots about growth mindset, just so that I can get an idea of, where to start from, if you like. Okay, so I will just also pull up the Facebook page so that I can see your comments. Okay, so that should work. Okay, so all right, so I'm not sure that I'm going to, maybe the comments are coming through slowly, not to worry. Okay, so most of us, I think, have heard about this idea of growth mindset, but it's not necessarily understood in that much depth. So I'm going to start by just giving you a little bit of background to what I mean by this. Okay, so learning to walk, right? This is something that everybody well, most people anyway, have to do. And what happens when children learn to walk is mainly that they fall over. They fall over again and again and again. But we don't see children sitting there and saying, oh, well, obviously I'm no good at walking, so I'm not going to try anymore. Instead, we see them continuing to try. They accept that falling down is part of the process. And while it may take some longer than others, they all learn to do it in the end. But by the time they get to be teenagers, this kind of natural motivation to learn, this natural interest in learning, if you like, has often faded, shall we say. So what has happened? Well, they've lost probably that sort of lack of self-consciousness that they may have had when they were small children. They're more worried about what other people think of them. And particularly, you know, at this kind of age, teenagers, young adults, the opinions of their peers are very important to them. So that is part of it. But they also very often have decided what they can and can't do, what they think they are good at, what they think they are bad at. So they have, in other words, developed what we might call a fixed mindset. And this will hold them back considerably and limit their potential. So let's look in a little bit more detail at what we mean by a fixed mindset. So looking at these two statements here, if you mostly believe the first statement, right, no matter how much intelligence you have, you can always change it a great deal. That is more of a growth mindset, whereas a fixed mindset is more like statement B. So you can learn new things, but you can't really change your basic level of intelligence. So the difference there is a growth mindset believes that you actually can change how much intelligence you have. And in fact, we know that now that this is a fact because neuroscience has allowed us to see how the brain works. And whereas in the past, people thought that by the time we were maybe 18, our brain was completely fixed. Now we know that it's constantly growing and changing, even, you know, into much, much later adulthood, really for the whole of our life, at least to a degree. Or let's look at these two statements. So 2A, I like my work best when it makes me think hard. Or I like my work best when I can do it really well without too much trouble. Now, most of us, I suspect, tend to be a bit like sentence 2B, but that is more of a fixed mindset. So this idea that it's good to find something easy doesn't stretch us, doesn't make us challenge ourselves, and therefore doesn't make us grow. So a growth mindset would be more like statement 2A. Okay, another example. 3A, I like work that I'll learn from, even if I make a lot of mistakes. 3B, I like my work best when I can do it perfectly without any mistakes. Now, it's nice to do things perfectly, but how much learning is actually happening if we're not making any mistakes? So a growth mindset, again, would be more like the first statement there. And the last one, okay, when something is hard, it just makes me want to work more on it, not less. And 4B, to tell the truth, when I work hard, it makes me feel as though I'm not very smart. Now, this is something that can very often, I think, demotivate students. If they believe that everything should be easy and that if it's difficult, it's because they're not a very good student, that's going to hold them back. Because in fact, what we want is for students to see something hard as a challenge and something that they want to work more on. Okay, so I don't know whether when looking at those statements, you were able to identify in yourself whether you had perhaps more of a fixed mindset or more of a growth mindset. But I think it's something that we need to think about as teachers as well. So this idea of a growth mindset or a fixed mindset comes from this book by Dr. Carol S. Dweck. And this book has had a really, well, you can see it's a 1 million copy bestseller. And it's had a huge influence on education in particular. So whether or not you have more of a fixed mindset or more of a growth mindset has a huge impact on your motivation and on how efficiently you learn. So to give you some examples, okay, if you have a fixed mindset, you will tend to avoid challenges because you don't want to look stupid. If you have a growth mindset, you embrace challenges because you want to stretch yourself and learn. When you come up against an obstacle, if you have a fixed mindset, you'll just give up when you're faced with a setback. You'll decide that you can't do it and give up. A growth mindset perseveres, carries on when they hit a setback or an obstacle. Effort, as I mentioned before, if you have to try hard, a person with a fixed mindset will decide that means that they're not very talented or clever. Whereas somebody with a growth mindset understands that putting in effort is what leads to success. And then in terms of feedback, now, of course, our role as teachers is very largely to do with giving feedback to students. That's how they learn. But if our students have more of a fixed mindset, they will tend to ignore any negative feedback that we give them, even constructive negative feedback, because it makes them feel stupid. Whereas a student with more of a growth mindset will understand that if the feedback is constructive and helpful, then that will help them to improve. And so they're more open to feedback. And finally, if you have more of a fixed mindset, when other people succeed, you tend to see that as a threat because you feel that that says something about you. It makes you feel insecure. If you have more of a growth mindset and you know that you can also improve and succeed, then other people's success can be inspiring and you can learn from that, which obviously within a class is something that we want to encourage because that, you know, will help the whole class to be more motivated and to learn more efficiently. So why do students lose their growth mindset? So as I said at the beginning, we all have a growth mindset when we are little children. We don't, you know, think that we can't do things. We just keep trying. Now, I think there are two main reasons. One is when we receive unhelpful sort of negative criticism. So, you know, when maybe a parent or a teacher says things like, oh, you're doing it all wrong, you're hopeless at this, you know, you'll never get it right, that kind of feedback. That can certainly encourage students to develop more of a fixed mindset. However, sometimes it's parents or teachers trying to be nice and helpful. And they say things like my mother used to say this to me. I wasn't very good at maths at school. And my mother used to say to me, oh, you're just like me. I don't have a maths brain either. In our family, we're good at languages. Right? Now, she meant to be kind, but in fact, that sort of taught me, reinforced that I couldn't do maths. And in fact, that's not true at all, because when I came to do my master's degree in English language teaching, I had to do a module in statistics. And I panicked because I thought, I can't do maths, I won't be able to do it. And of course I could do it perfectly well. It was just that I had told myself that I couldn't do it. So we need to be careful about both of these things, okay? Not just not overly criticizing or in a negative way, but also not limiting our students, not telling them that they can't do things. So, you know, here is some pieces of research which back up what Carol Dweck has to say about this. So parents' ratings of their children's competence in maths strongly predicts their children's own beliefs. So in other words, what the parents think, the children think. And by the age 8 to 9, those beliefs are starting to become fixed. So they start to believe, like I did, that they can't do mathematics. Another interesting statistic, right? 94% of maths professors in the UK are men. Now, you might think that that means that boys and men are better at mathematics. And there is a lot, well, a lot of people do believe this. A lot of people believe that men and boys are better at maths and women and girls are better at languages. And this comes from a piece of research in the 1970s, which found, supposedly, that girls were better at languages and communication and boys were better at maths. However, now that we have the ability to look at people's brains, we can see that actually this has no basis at all. There is no difference in the brain between male and female that would make men better at maths and women better at languages. But people continue to believe myths like this because that's something that perhaps their parents said to them, and you know, we just believe these things. And that's a good example, I think, of like a fixed mindset. Now, this is an interesting piece of research. So another thing that many people believe is that men are better at spatial attention. You know, so at I actually am not very good at all at spatial attention. So I find, like, when I read a map that I need to turn it around in order to work out where I'm going. Right? And for a long time, I believed as well that men were better at reading maps than women. But in this piece of research, they trained men and women for 10 hours on a computer game, which required them to develop spatial attention. And they found that after 10 hours, there was no difference between male and female. So I think this is another, you know, good example of how we can have beliefs which show a fixed mindset, which perhaps then stop us from doing things that actually we can do if we just stop telling ourselves that we can't. Another kind of belief that I hear quite often is this idea of people being left-brained or right-brained. You know, so the idea is that some people are much more logical and left-brained, some people are more right-brained and more creative. But again, now that we understand about neuroscience and we can look at the brain, as it says here, right, there is no evidence that this is true at all. And in fact, as Jeff Anderson says here, it would be highly inefficient if people were going around using just one half of the brain most of the time. And, you know, the brain is actually very efficient because it uses a lot of calories. So it's important that it's efficient. So, you know, we know that there are some functions that tend to occur in one or the other side of the brain. Language tends to be on the left, attention on the right. But if there's damage to the brain, everything can swap around, right? So this really is a, you know, at least a big oversimplification. And as we saw with the people who were doing the training on the video game, if we practice things, we can literally change our brains and how they work. So why is this? It's because of the way the brain is constructed. So the brain is made up of hundreds of thousands of these things called neurons. And the neurons kind of connect together. So if you imagine, you know, people in a room holding hands in a big chain and squeezing those hands, it's like that. There's like an impulse that goes from one neuron to the next, to the next, to the next. And the more often that happens, the more the brain becomes used to that particular sequence, and that becomes what we call a neural pathway. So, neuroscientists have a saying, they say, what fires together, wires together. And what they mean is that when those neurons fire together, they become more and more fixed, if you like, together. So that's why some ideas or some habits, or, you know, all the ways that our brains work can become very fixed. Now, sometimes that's a good thing. For example, when we learn to drive, lots of what we're doing while we're driving is quite automatic. And that's helpful, because actually it would be very difficult to drive. However, it can also be unhelpful if we have a very sort of fixed way of doing something that doesn't help us. But the good news is that we can always change that. The brain is very, very flexible and plastic, much more so than we thought. So if you think of a neural pathway as being like a pathway in the forest, if lots of people walk down that pathway every day, that pathway will become very clear, very wide. If people stop using that pathway, then over time it will grow over. And it's the same in the brain. So if we stop doing something a particular way and we start doing it a different way, over time, the different way will become wide and clear in this way. Okay, so this means, right, the reason I called this presentation, I want to break free. This is why it's exciting, because growth mindset means that actually we can do maybe not anything, but we can do almost anything that we make up our minds that we want to do. So those ideas that we have about what we can't do, what we're not very good at, you know, we can actually break free from that. And that is actually incredibly motivating. Okay, so most of us will still have, even when we understand about growth mindset, we will still have some kind of pockets of fixed mindset. So some areas where we still have fixed mindset. So the more we understand about it, the more we can look for those and question them. So if we find ourselves saying things like, oh, I'm really bad at doing this, we can ask ourselves, is that actually true? Was there a time perhaps when I could do that, or I did that well? Maybe if I tried to do it a different way, and so on. So how can we help our students to develop growth mindset? Because I'm sure that that is the question that you're looking for. Okay, so I'm just looking, I can see a few questions now here. Which mindset do you think you have, a growth or fixed one? Yes, so one thing to say is that actually we mostly have a kind of mixture. So we might have a growth mindset in terms of learning English, but a fixed mindset about our ability to cook, for example. Maybe we've decided we just can't do it. Right? So we quite often have a mixture of the two. Yeah, so there's a question here, 94% of maths professors are men. So why are more men than women teaching math-related fields? I think that simply is because lots of people believe that men are better than women at maths. And so women give up maths much earlier and they don't progress to be a professor. Although the sister of a friend of mine is a female professor of maths. So there are some. Okay, so let's look at some practical ways we can help our students to develop growth mindset. Okay, the first thing I think we can do is to try to change our students' perception about success. So this is a meme that I often see on social media, and it is exactly right. You know, people think that success is a straight line that goes from A to B, and that's it. And it's not like that at all. In most cases, success is much, much messier than that. It involves going backwards at times, it involves getting stuck, it involves, you know, having problems along the way, and that is absolutely fine. And that is how we succeed, because we deal with those problems. But if our students think that their success should be like the top arrow, when it isn't like that, they may lose motivation and give up. So I think we can help them by helping them to understand, you know, that that's not how the process works. And, you know, the language that we use matters. It's a small thing in some ways, but Carol Dweck talks about the importance of the word yet. So rather than I can't do it, we can encourage our students to say and to think, I can't do it yet. So it's not a final thing. It's not a, that's the end, I can't do it. It simply means we haven't learned how to do it yet, or we haven't practiced enough yet, but we still can. Okay, praise is another thing that we need to consider in terms of our language. So these are some typical pieces of teacher praise. You know, and they sound really nice, don't they? You did brilliantly as usual. You're really clever. That's a great answer. But there is a problem with this kind of praise. Does anybody have an idea what the problem might be with giving this kind of praise? See if you can put it in the comments if you're not too far behind. Okay, I'll come back and look. So the problem with this kind of praise is that it can encourage a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so if you think, you know, you did brilliantly as usual, that's telling the student that they don't have to try hard because they always do really well. So firstly, that could be demotivating because we're telling them they don't have to try. Secondly, that could demotivate them because the next time, if they are not sure that they are going to be brilliant, they probably won't say anything because they don't want to disappoint you next time. Again, you know, you're really clever. That's fixed mindset because, in fact, intelligence is not something that we either have or we don't have. It's something that we can develop. And the third one, you know, great answer. How does that help anyone to develop further? Why was it a great answer? Okay, so I want to just say a little bit here about the teenage brain. So the teenage brain is going through an incredible process. I have a picture here of something that we call in English pruning. Right? And pruning is when you cut back a plant so that it will grow more. And between the ages of about 12 and about 25, the brain goes through something called neural pruning. And lots of brain cells are cut back in order to kind of encourage new growth. So there is a huge process going on inside the brain. And this is one of the reasons why, you know, teenagers have, I don't know, you know, maybe some emotional difficulties at times. They don't always find it easy to regulate their emotions. They take risks, bigger risks than we would as adults, because of all of this activity that's happening within the brain. Now, you know, that might sound like a bad thing, but it's necessary in order to make way for the new growth. And there is a lot of new growth going on. So when our teenage students look back at what they were like when they were at primary school, everything that they think about themselves, like I'm not good at languages or I'm not good at maths, or may well not be true anymore, because their brains are changing so much. And actually research confirms this, that the way that how well students did at primary school often doesn't actually reflect how well they're going to do at secondary school at all. And the students who do best at secondary school, at high school, are not necessarily those who are the most academic. They are the ones who are the most motivated and who learn to use good learning strategies. So, you know, we can help students a lot if we can help them with motivation and if we can help them with learning strategies. So how can we do that? Some practical ways to build growth mindset in the classroom. Okay, so first of all, we need to really encourage them to take responsibility for their own learning. You know, this is vital, because the students, this is part of having a growth mindset, that students take this responsibility. So how can we do that? Well, first of all, I think we can look at the students in our class and see whether they are really participating, whether everyone is participating. Because quite often, it's just a few students in each class who are putting up their hand and offering answers. So we can start by analysing the interaction in the class and see which students are participating, which are not so much. Maybe we could video the class, maybe we could have somebody observe, maybe we could just try to notice ourselves. The second thing we can do is to increase what is known as wait time. So wait time is the time that a teacher waits after asking a question and before they accept an answer from one of the students. Now, a piece of research that was done quite a few years ago now, but it found that the average amount of time that a teacher waited before they either accepted an answer or answered the question themselves was 1.5 seconds. Now, when I ask teachers to guess how many seconds teachers wait on average, people usually guess about 10 seconds, right? And in fact, the average is 1.5 seconds. So we don't wait very long at all. If we wait just 3 seconds, that has been shown to have a huge impact on how many students participate and on the quality of their responses. So that would be my first tip. Wait longer before you accept an answer or you give them the answer, because some students need that extra time just to become confident about the answer, just to get ready to say it, right? Thirdly, right, using small groups can be very helpful in terms of getting students to participate more. Now, we probably won't do this all the time, but if we can start to introduce it more often, that helps students to take a little bit more responsibility. And we can allocate specific roles within that group. So maybe one student is in charge of keeping everybody on the topic, another one is in charge of keeping the time, another one perhaps is making a note of any mistakes that need dealing with. And we can talk to our learners, you know, about participation and get them to take more responsibility. If they're not used to this kind of way of working, then we may need to start, you know, maybe with just 5 minutes, and gradually we can build it up. Offering our students choices is another way we can help them to take responsibility for their own learning and therefore increase their motivation. So a piece of research, this was with elementary students, so quite young students, and this piece of research found that when they gave students a choice about which tasks they would work on, the students completed more tasks in less time. So that element of choice really helped with motivation. And I think as students get older, you know, as they become teenagers and young adults, this is even more important because it's about them taking ownership themselves. And we need to try not to help students too much, not to spoon feed them, as we say in English. So here's a piece of research where they gave students, these were high school students, a task to work on a project. And they didn't give them clear instructions. They had to find for themselves how they were going to do it. And the result was that the students put more time into the project, they produced better write-ups, and they remembered the material better than those who had been given really clear step-by-step instructions. And I think this is because they took responsibility for it. Okay, I'm just looking at a comment here. Research shows that the widely pattern of interaction used in classes is teacher to students. Absolutely, yeah. And listening to students is another key factor to help promote growth mindset. Yes, I totally agree. Because by listening to them, we are letting them know that what they have to say is valuable. And that absolutely helps, I think, with motivation and with growth mindset. Okay, so this is one of my favorite quotes. Now I've left a gap here to see whether you can fill it in. It comes from Caleb Gattegno, who was the creator of teaching methodology from the 1970s called the silent way. But the missing word is not silence, it is mistake. So the quote is, a mistake is a gift to the class. And this is one of my favorite quotes because I think it is absolutely true. And if we can persuade students of the truth of this, we can often really, really help them to shift their mindset. So mistakes, you know, are not something that we want to avoid in language learning. Mistakes can be absolutely something which help us to learn. So one idea that you can use in the classroom is to actually encourage your students to keep a mistake log or diary. So at the end of each class, perhaps give them a few minutes, or they could make notes when it happens in the middle of the class if appropriate. So think of a couple of mistakes that you made and think, okay, what was the mistake? What caused the mistake? And what did I learn from that mistake? And I think if we can do this, we can help students to stop feeling embarrassed and humiliated if they make a mistake, and to see it as an opportunity to learn. Because if students feel bad about making a mistake, they will probably keep making that mistake because they won't want to think about it, they won't want to learn from it. So if we can help them to see those mistakes as an opportunity to learn and improve, and we can also learn from other people's mistakes as well. This is why a mistake is a gift to the class. Then, you know, that makes a huge difference, I think, in terms of both motivation and learning. You know, another possibility, some teachers will actually set a mistake quota. So they might say something to the students like, I expect you to make at least 3 mistakes in this exercise. So if you haven't made any mistakes, then you need to ask me to make the work more challenging for you. Because if you're getting everything right, that means you're probably not learning very much. So you should be making a few mistakes. Obviously not, everything wrong, because then the level is too high. But you do want to find it a bit difficult and challenging. And that means you are going to make a few mistakes. Okay, so related to this is the idea of desirable difficulty. Now, you might think, or somebody who has more of a fixed mindset might think that difficulty, can't possibly be desirable. Nobody wants something to be difficult. However, Elizabeth and Robert Bjork, who came up with this idea of desirable difficulty, did some research, and the research found that, well, as they put here, conditions of learning that make performance improve rapidly often fail to support long-term retention and transfer. So in other words, if you make progress very, very quickly and you find things quite easy, you probably won't remember what you were doing for very long. Whereas conditions that create challenges and slow the rate of apparent learning often optimize long-term retention and transfer. Whereas if you find it a bit difficult and it's quite slow to learn, you will remember it and you will be able to transfer it into different situations. And I think if we can help our students to understand this, this has, big impacts in terms of how effectively they study. So to give an example, I don't know in your context, but in the UK, students very often think that a good way to study is to read through their notes and to highlight the bits that they want to learn. Now, this is actually really not an effective way to study at all, because there's no challenge going on. They're not having to struggle. There's no difficulty. And so the brain kind of looks at all the highlights and thinks, oh, I know all of this, when in fact they don't, right? So a much more effective way to study is to test yourself. So maybe read the page, highlight if you want to, and then close the book and test yourself. What can you remember? And then that difficulty, that desirable difficulty, will actually help you to remember in the future. So, this is all part of encouraging students to develop metacognition, or the ability to understand learning and thinking and how their brains work. And of course, this is also part of giving them more responsibility. There's a nice quote here from the OECD Insights. Too often we teach students what to think, but not how to think. And I think it's really important that we also teach students how to think. Okay, so to sum up then, some key points about growth mindset. So learning is not that straight line, right? Learning requires repetition, it requires trial and error, it requires mistakes. Difficulty can be desirable. It can be a good thing to find something difficult and to struggle a bit, because that's what helps us to remember. Of course, we have to get the right level of difficulty. If something is really way too difficult, then we will give up. But we want that level of difficulty that is just, above what we find that we can do easily. Remember the importance of yet, not I can't do it, but I can't do it yet. When we're praising students, remember that it needs to be specific, not just, oh, that's really good, but specifically about something that they've done that they can learn from. and related to effort rather than natural talent. So you worked really hard on that. You've made a lot of improvement. Those are the kinds of bits of praise that will really help our students. Autonomy and choice for our students are vital, because we want them to take ownership of their learning, because that will help them to develop motivation and to develop a growth mindset. And finally, give students ownership, by teaching them about the process of learning, about how their brains work. Okay, so I hope you find this useful. If you would like to stay in touch, my website is here at the bottom, and that's my Facebook group. So please feel free to come and join the Facebook group or to check out my website. And we do have a bit of time now if there are any more questions. So I will, I know that the Facebook page is a little bit behind in terms of the feed here. So I will wait and see if there are any questions that come up. I'll stop sharing now though.
Great tips.
Thank you, Aziz. So do you have any questions while we're waiting?
Yes, this is my favorite topic, actually. All these things you mentioned, brain plasticity and the neurons and psychology, all these things are really my favorite topics.
Me too.
You mentioned some very new things to me. Actually, I learned some new things from this session.
Oh, good.
And I have a couple of comments. The problem is that the saying that old habits die hard. So if we, in the context of shifting mindset, do you think it's sometimes impossible or very challenging to change a certain habit because it's fixed, it's there forever?
Well, you see, no, I don't think it is. I mean, I think it is true that it can be hard to change habits, but that's different from it's fixed and it's there forever. The brain is, as you know, very, very plastic. And I mean, there was perhaps you've heard of this piece of research that was done into London taxi drivers. So London taxi drivers traditionally have to do a test where they have to learn all of the routes around London. Right, so it's a huge amount of memorization and it takes them months. And in this piece of research, they scanned with an MRI scan their brain before and after doing this test. And they found that the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain associated with memory, was bigger afterwards than it was before. And these were like, men in their 30s or 40s, so not young people. And they had changed the size of a part of their brain. So it's absolutely not fixed, but it does require effort.
A lot of effort.
Yes, but less so when you're a teenager.
Yes, the example of the forest pathway was really a good example in this regard. So the incentives are really dangerous. The way we encourage students in the classroom, great example, that's awesome. This is really dangerous. It's counterproductive. It's actually, it's negative because it's demotivating students.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea, isn't it? I think it's true as well. I've seen with my own, because I have two teenagers. I have a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. And yes, if you just praise and say, oh, you're really good at this, very often, either they will stop trying or they will not want to risk losing your good opinion, And so it's much more effective to make the praise specific about that particular thing they've done, about the effort that they've put in.
Yes.
You know, so yeah, it's an interesting point.
You also mentioned increase in wait time. Teachers are impatient in this context. They want the answers immediately. It's a habit, and I said earlier that old habits that die hard. It's really a habit, and I know a lot of teachers do it, including myself. Sometimes we are impatient to get the answers. You said there is a research that can you remind us of the research, the impact of the research?
Yeah, so I cannot remember the name of the people now. I can come back and put it in the comments. But the research found that on average it was 1.5 seconds that teachers were waiting, and they then got them to wait 3 seconds, and they saw a big difference in terms of the quality and amount of participation.
The quality of the answers.
Yes, because more students had a chance to just think it through, because 1.5 seconds is not very long. You know, we already know what the answer is, so we think it's easy, but you know, for a student,
because this is also disrupt the process of thinking, because thinking requires time, requires there is a process.
Yeah,
and if we are impatient, this whole process will not be effective.
No,
that's
I mean,
great.
We can do, I mean, there are things you can do as well. I don't know, do you know the technique think, pair, share?
Yes.
For example, yeah, so that can be a good way of giving students more time. You know, so you get them to think about it, then to talk to their partner, and then they can share it with the class. But we can train ourselves to wait longer, but most people don't like silence. You know, so they want to fill the silence.
Yes, the people don't like silence. Some people don't like silence. But it's good. Silence is good sometimes. Very good. Rachel, you there is also the idea of desirable difficulty. I read somewhere that there is a concept, you know, very similar to this. It is the ZPD, the zone of proximal development. That we need to create tasks that are not too difficult, are not too easy. Because if they are too easy, students will say this is baby stuff. Are you making fun of us or something? But if they are also very difficult, so they will get frustrated. So this area, this medium area, it's really challenging to create these tasks that are within their zone.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example that you give, actually, because I think when I was describing it, it's Vygotsky, isn't it, that zone of proximal development?
The Russian scholar.
And it came into my head too. And I think this is partly why I think it's so important that we get students to take as much responsibility as possible, because we want them to be thinking, oh, I could have this a bit harder. You know, we want them to, because it's difficult for us as teachers, I think, to know precisely how difficult something should be for each of our students. So if the students take more responsibility for that, and if they say, as I gave the example, you know, oh, you know, I found that quite easy, I haven't made any mistakes, you know, can you make this a bit harder for me? Then that can help us, you know, to get that level right, rather than the students sitting there going, great, this is really easy, I'm not going to say anything.
Great. So, do you want to respond to a comment, the final comment by
yes, sure. So
is promoting growth mindset related to learners language learning strategy?
Okay, good question. Yes, I think it is related to it, because it's about students taking responsibility for their learning, and, you know, for kind of like how their brains work and what works for them, or what doesn't. So yes, I think, you know, it's not the same thing, but there's quite a big overlap, I think, between the two.
So thank you so much, Richard. This is very interesting, and really we learned a lot from you. So do you have any project, maybe articles? Do you think of writing articles or any projects about this topic in the future? Apart from the talks.
Yeah, I think I have written a blog post or two about it. Actually, I'll have a look and see if I can put it into the comments, because I think I have actually written about this on my blog.
Okay.
So I will make a note of that.
That's great.
And also you wanted to know the reference about wait time, didn't you?
Yes.
So I will come back into the group, and I will put it in the comments.
Is your group? I know I am a member of your group, and I attend some of your webinars. Is your group open to everyone?
It's open to anyone who's sort of well, in fact, there are a few people who are not in English language teaching, but it is open to anyone in English language teaching.
Anyone, I mean, you know, teachers.
Yes, of course, absolutely. Yeah, anyone in English language teaching who wants to learn more about managing stress, personal development, you know, anything along those kinds of lines. Yes, please do come along.
Do you have a final comment before we close the session?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you everyone who has been watching, and it's been a pleasure. And yep, have a good rest of your evening.
So thank you so much for sharing all these amazing tips with us, and see you later. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Or evening.
Yes, thank you, and you. And everyone watching. Bye-bye.